Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good evening. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next hour here on Radio Hamra. Student number to call in 310-441-0555. We are in the almost middle of December now, and with the new year comes lots of plans and hopes and ideas about resolutions, goals, transformation, changing who we are. And often, in these 11 plus years doing the show, I've talked about goals and how to set better goals. And also some of the things I have issue with of how people think about change or what they want to change. And I wanted to talk about that again with some hopefully fresh thoughts and newer thoughts on the topic and just some ideas about change in general, goals, what I think is more realistic versus not realistic, what people do that gets them in trouble, what can be helpful. And so to begin with, there's this notion of, often even here they say, new year, new you, or new year, new me, like this, the new year is going to come, 2026, and all of a sudden you're going to become this totally new person. And I think first of all, it comes from a magical thinking kind of perspective, this idea we have this imagined, idealized sense of ourself, of what we could become. If I just did it all right, I know what to do. I know all the things I need to do, from, life to exercise and diet to reading to meditation to whatever it is, making all the right choices in life. I'm having a hard time doing them consistently or not making mistakes. But if I could just do it all the way I know I can and become who I'm supposed to be, then I know I'm going to become this, unstoppable force, this like superhero-like figure. So we have this idea of an idealized sense of self, that it could be good to have goals, aspirations, even aspire to get better and be better. That's not bad. What I think could be problematic is we have an unrealistic idea or image of what we are supposed to become or what we can become. So on one end, we over-exaggerate what we can become, I believe, or this idea we have of something we're supposed to become, which is based on, as I was saying, this image we might have of ourselves, of who we are deep down, that's supposed to, be unleashed to people we see in the public eye, who, one, we only get to see certain sides of them, the good sides of them, and also often they're trying to sell themselves as being perfect or having a perfect life or leading the perfect life. So in some way, it makes us feel like, well, yeah, I guess it is possible because look, there are these people doing it. But the reality is those people aren't actually doing it. They don't have a perfect life. They're trying to present a perfect life or present that they are this perfect person. And this includes celebrities, influencers, but also self-help, motivational speakers, gurus, this type of people as well, that try to present themselves as having figured it all out and living a perfect life. And if you just follow them or become like them, you too can live this perfect life. So unfortunately, it sells us this myth that this imagined, idealized self is possible, is realistic, even when it's not. So we over-exaggerate what we think we should become or can become. And that has its problems when it's not realistic. But the other thing we tend to do is we undervalue who we are now. And as I'll talk about, I'm not saying, we shouldn't try to grow, that whoever you are, you're perfect now, and, you're, nothing's wrong with you in any kind of way, or nothing could be better. But I do see, this is just personal, professional, in therapy, that people tend to be very hard on themselves and how they see themselves, that they think they're doing much worse than they are. Overall, let's say as parents, as partners in life, work, all of these things, they think they're really, really doing bad. And I'm not saying there's not room for improvement. I think for all of us in every aspect of life, we can make improvements. But I'm talking about how bad we think we are now, this undervaluing of our current self that I think is there. So we have these two extremes, the undervaluing of our current self and this overvaluing of who we can become. And this creates this huge distance that makes us feel really bad about who we are now, because what I am now is so bad, even though it's not as bad as we think. And who I'm supposed to become is so incredibly good, even though that's not possible and it's not going to be that good. And because of that, it makes us have this sense of, I need a new me. This present me, current me is so bad and so far from what I should be and what I can be. And I think this is really problematic because it gives us this sense of, I'm so bad, I need to become so different, I need to become different so fast. I shouldn't feel good about who I am now because I'm supposed to be so much better. There is this idealized sense of self that I have to, become, and I can become. And I think this creates a lot of sadness, heartbreak, shame, lots of bad things that we, will feel about ourselves in our present day and our current life. And then it'll also make us seek out things that are not healthy to make change. And this is another big contributor to why we are so drawn to quick fixes. I'm so bad what I am now and I could become so incredible. I need to make a change fast. And then enter in all the people that are selling us quick fixes who try to fill this gap and make it feel like, even though this distance feels so huge, I can help you get there quickly. It doesn't have to take a long time. You can have immediate breakthroughs, or in 30 days you can get to this place, or in 2 weeks, or if you take my seminar, if you read this book, it will transform you and then you will become that superhero-like person you know you were meant to be, and they use that kind of language. And I think it's really unfair what people do, and they're really taking advantage of people in their vulnerability, this vulnerability of almost emphasizing you are so bad now. They won't tell you that, but then you're going to become something incredible like you were meant to be, and people will fall for it. They will go for it because they feel that. And I really do think this is very harmful. And there's lots of people who are ready to sell you these things, or whether it's not even a specific product, they maybe are online, so they want you to like and follow, and that's how they make their money and get their popularity and fame. And then they might even later sell courses or books. But there is a whole industry that I think is revolving around taking advantage of people thinking they are worse than they are, and thinking that they're supposed to become something that's greater than they actually can become, and basically selling us that myth and making it seem like they're the ones that can make it real, make it a reality. And it feels good in that moment when we feel like someone has the answer. We're feeling so bad about ourselves, so it's so dark where we are. In comes this bright light that tells you, that who you are now, it doesn't have to be who you are tomorrow. And you could become that superhero that you were supposed to be. And it's a high-like feeling. And you see this high when people, you might even just watch a video and you might have like a smaller high from seeing someone give you this type of a motivational talk or telling you that they have the answers for you. You might feel this kind of a high if you maybe read a book about, making this kind of a change, or especially you see this high when people go to these types of transformational self-help seminars where there's a sense that you're going to become this superhero and that they're going to just help you become that quickly. And after the few days of this course or seminar or one day or whatever it might be, you're going to turn into this superhero. And it does feel like a high because it feels like, they make it feel very real. They hype up lots of energy and, so often sleep deprivation, food deprivation, things that make you feel a little bit more, more suggestible. And then they instill in you all this hope. And hope is not really obviously a bad thing, but it can be bad when it's a false hope or one that's not real. And that's, to me, what is very strongly happening in these cases. And people feel incredible because you have this high of, oh my God, I'm going to become that person I was always meant to be. And in that moment, it feels so real and so easy. As I was saying, any of us can think, okay, starting tomorrow, why don't I just wake up at 5 a.m. and then work out and do this and do this and do this, all the things I know I have to do, and just do that every day. I know how to do it. I know what I have to do. Why don't I just start doing it tomorrow? But the truth is we're human beings. We're not just robots or just some imagined type of thing. We're a real living being that has, ups and downs and won't just change tomorrow because we've imagined that we can change. But when you're in this type of a seminar environment, they take you on that high, and then you leave it, and it usually you feel it for a while. You might start to make some changes, but usually it wears off because what is really going on within you that's leading to you being where you are at in your life, which again isn't probably as bad as you think it is, but whatever it is, those are deeper things that don't just get changed in these quick moments of breakthroughs or a few days of a seminar. But people don't want to believe that that's true. It just seems like it's too hard. And these people who create these types of environments, they're very good at giving you that feeling that, all the people that tell you it's long or it's hard work, they're just not believing in the right way, or they don't believe in the magic, or they haven't seen what we've seen or what I've seen or what I've even done in my own life. Often the guru has, transformed themselves. It's kind of like, I was once a loser like you, and now look at me. So it gives you this feeling like you can do what they've done. And so you get sold this high, but it just usually fades, and you go back. And unfortunately, what happens is people are, they might even feel worse about themselves. There's almost this sense that, well, I was given the tools to fix everything and become, my true self and this amazing superhero. But if I couldn't do it, well, something really must be wrong with me. And unfortunately, that's often what they feel. Or there's this sense of, okay, well, I have to go back for another hit. It really does feel like a drug. I have to go to another seminar, or rewatch some things, or get the book, or do something to fill myself up. And again, it will make you feel that high again of, oh yeah, see, I get it again. This is right. These were my blocks, and this is why I couldn't do it. And now I'm gonna, I'm gonna get there this time. And then they usually will fall on their face again because they're avoiding facing what's really going on within them and trying to just follow some kind of fantasy that's on the outside rather than doing the work that is on the inside. And as I said, I'm not suggesting change is not possible. I'm also want to make it clear, I'm not saying anyone that's in the self-help realm writes a self-help book, any of the influencers, people that are talking about, parenting, dating, relationships, life in general, finance, whatever it is that people are talking about, and they're talking about every aspect of life. There's, I'm not saying they're all bad. That's definitely not the case. There's a lot of very good people with good intentions, doing good work, and doing it for the right reasons. I totally believe that. But I also think there's a lot of people out there that capitalize on these human frailties and some of these things that I've been bringing up to manipulate it towards sales. They see it as a sale. How do I get this person to buy into what I'm selling? Now, what I give them in the end might not matter. And it's even better than, let's say, if you sell a product, because people receive a product, they can see what it is. But this is so vague, ambiguous, and you can do a lot of blaming the buyer. Well, I have the tools for you. If you couldn't make it work, that's on you. It's kind of like coming up with a diet. It's not hard in some ways to come up with a diet that, let's say, if you want to lose weight, will work for people in the sense that you can just create a calorie deficit. But is it healthy? Is it something that's sustainable? That's a bigger question. And so you can say, well, if you did this diet, you would have lost weight, but maybe the diet is so incredibly hard to follow because people don't feel good when they're on it. But you can just blame that on the person, that they were weak-willed, didn't have the discipline, didn't have the perseverance. And so here they are again, failing at their goal because they didn't want it enough, or they didn't want to try hard enough. And so that's what I really take issue with, is that there's a lot of that out there. So as we're getting close to our first commercial break, and as we're getting close to the new year, when these feelings come up of I have to become someone totally different, as I was saying, to me, there's these two issues. One is over-exaggerating or thinking how good you're supposed to be, being better than what's really possible, and also thinking you are worse than you are now. And that's a big one, undervaluing and underestimating who you are now. We're all imperfect human beings. And unfortunately, we tend to sometimes focus too much on those imperfections and think that means something's really wrong or bad about me. And we can really hold on to that shame and thinking the only solution is become someone totally different from who we are now. But no, you be you. Work on yourself, as we all should, but don't think you have to become someone different to be someone good. Let's go to our first commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So I was talking about New Year's resolutions leading to wanting to make changes and become a new you, and how probably the you now, the same you, is actually better than you think. And what you think you're supposed to come is likely an over-exaggeration or an idealized imagination that you have. And that's not to say that we can't make really, really big changes in our lives. I definitely want to make it clear that it's not some kind of pessimism about change, or you are what you are, why are you even trying to change at all? I don't believe in that at all. I really think that people can make tremendous changes in their life. It's just that, as I said, I think people can be too hard on themselves, one, and imagine what they're supposed to come is too great. And because of that, as I was talking about in the last segment, they can fall for quick fixes and fall for fantasy types of, if we want to call it, treatment or techniques or things that are out there, because we have this idea that it's supposed to be something magical that changes us into something magical, when it's nothing magical at all. You just put in a lot of hard work and make changes, and it'll be magical by the end, but not from some kind of stroke of magic, but just because you will make a lot of change. If you take one step in the right direction, each day won't make much of a difference, but over a long period of time, you can make up a huge amount of distance. So I think it's important to have that mindset when it comes to change, that it's almost always very slow. It's actually very often when you try to make change, you don't see progress a lot of the time. It's not like this linear feeling of literally every day things get better. Let's say you're learning a new instrument. You play, and sometimes you might feel really stuck. Like, I feel like I'm not getting any better. And then all of a sudden, you'll feel like this huge jump. So very often progress comes in these jumps, not some kind of fantasy jump from like novice to expert, but just putting in the work. You sometimes don't see the changes that are coming about until something more tangible makes it clear to you. Another reason why being too hard on ourselves, I think it's obviously not good for us to feel that anyway, even if out of the context of change or trying to make change. But another reason why I actually see it as problematic is that when we think what we are is so bad, or have a lot of shame around that, it actually makes it harder for us to change, which could feel like a paradox. And that brings me to a quote by Carl Rogers that I don't have in front of me, but it's something like, the curious paradox is only when I accept myself as I am, then can I change. So only when you accept yourself as you are does change become possible. So sometimes I think of this like, if you're just trying to run away from a nightmare, that's a problem. Meaning, like, if what you are now, you think it's this nightmare, scary thing, that's not good. But if you're chasing a dream, you feel like you're okay where you are and you want to chase towards some kind of dream, that's a much better position to be in. So if we are so hard on ourselves, we often have a harder time making change. I'm also reminded of when we look at addiction and people try to overcome addiction. They've found that when you relapse, if we look at someone who's relapsed, let's say someone who has a drinking problem, alcoholism, if they are very, very hard on themselves after they relapse, just really beating themselves up and just shameful, oh, I can't believe it, that's not me, even going kind of back to this theme of the show, I'm someone who doesn't do this. What we find is that those people are more likely to relapse again or drink again that day or shortly after. And it makes sense, because if someone is dealing with addiction, there's so many things going on, but one of them is that they use the substance or the behavior to deal with big feelings. And that's actually not just bad feelings. We often think, oh, if someone's really sad, they turn to their drug of choice. But what you find is, people say like, I drank when I got really sad. I drank when I got really happy. Now, often they're just drinking all the time, so it would cover everything. But what they often find is they get really excited even, and they might want to drink, not just to celebrate. They might say that, oh, I should celebrate this. But it's because the alcohol helps them moderate their feelings or feel some sense of control over their feelings. And so if someone relapses and then beats themselves up and says, I'm so bad, I can't believe this, and is just so hard on themselves, they're going to have now these huge feelings of shame and guilt and feeling bad and remorse and all of those things that then will make them be more likely to have to turn to something or want to turn to something, and they'll turn to the alcohol again to help deal with these big feelings. And, might justify by, well, I already fell off the wagon, let me just enjoy it, or I'll start again on a Monday, or I'll start again next year. That's the time to make a change. And they're more likely to, unfortunately, relapse. And so this doesn't mean the alternative is just think, oh, it's okay, it doesn't matter what I did, I never should feel bad about it. No, you can definitely feel bad about it, and you should. It would make sense to feel bad about relapsing. You're not going to feel good about that. Let's say compared to a day where you didn't drink, if you were trying to stop drinking, it would make sense. You feel worse, you feel bad about it. But it's about how bad. Are you making yourself feel like you're a really bad person, shaming yourself, telling yourself how bad you are? Or are you like, yeah, I don't feel good about this. I made a mistake. This was not a good day. And try to learn from it. What did I do wrong? What maybe contributed to it? Was it coming for a while and I didn't, seek some kind of support or help? Or did I kind of see I was going to go towards it and let myself unconsciously get drawn to it, and I could be more aware of that? Whatever it might be, you're more likely to be able to approach it with a more level head, which also will make you less likely to turn to the alcohol again if you're able to not be so hard on yourself. And this also can feel counterintuitive to people. Think, no, I got to be hard on myself because I have high standards. But this is not high standards and being hard on yourself don't have to be the same thing. You can have very, very high standards, but still approach yourself with self-love and compassion. It doesn't mean if you beat yourself up. That's what sometimes I think people think, and that's how it looks. Even I see this in athletes. They'll make a mistake, they'll miss a shot, make a bad pass, whatever it might be, and then they think like, oh, if I beat myself up, literally, sometimes even hit themselves, or like show how upset they are. In a way, this is showing, one, that I'm so hard on myself, but also that, oh, what I did there was a big mistake for me. That was actually very easy for me, but I just made a big mistake, right? So if I miss a shot and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm making a big reaction, there's obviously something that I'm almost directly, but in a way indirectly saying that, oh, I always make that shot. That shot is easy for me. So missing it is like a big miss, is a big deal for me. But I think at times that's performative. You're doing it because people are watching and to show them that. And that's obviously always going to take away from you performing at your best when you're coping in a way that is more for the people around you than you yourself and within you. But I don't think that helps you. You missed it. You're not going to feel good about it. You obviously would have rather made the shot, and you might be surprised you missed it or might have some negative feelings about it. But being so hard on yourself is not going to help you make the next shot. If you're beating yourself, getting so mad, and even think about that, that's dysregulating you. It's not putting you in a good place to then perform again at your best. So if you're in this state of agitation, and let's say right then you get the ball again to shoot it, you're not going to be in as good of a state as if you were able to keep a more level head and not be so hard on yourself. So I think people mistake this notion that people who have high standards are hard on themselves, and if you're not hard on yourself, then you have low standards. But that doesn't have to be the case at all. You can make a mistake and say this is not okay, we're not accepting it, but it doesn't mean you have to be blowing up or getting so mad. Whether it's an individual or an organization, and you see a lot of very high performing, high standard organizations don't approach things with this like we have to be cutthroat, and if you make a mistake you're going to get punished, and all of those things. This is actually where I think of a term called psychological safety, which I've used a lot of the word paradox a lot, or things that are counterintuitive, but I think that term, unfortunately, it's a good one, but maybe the wording of it can make people think that psychological safety means that, okay, we can use this for an organization and whether or not they have psychological safety. And I think people might hear that as like, oh, it's like everyone wearing, padded gloves and being super gentle. And I don't want to trigger you. I don't want to make anyone upset. I want to avoid conflict. I don't want to say anything that might make anyone not feel good. But that's not at all what psychological safety means. Psychological safety means actually there's a space to make mistakes because we'll address them. So it's not because they get ignored and it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. It's the same thing as if you did it well. But it's not this feeling that if you make a mistake, you're going to get beat up or humiliated or, have to feel really bad about it. We're going to address it and, expect you to make it right and do whatever you need to do to amend the situation if that's possible. And then we'll also want to learn from the situation. But we're not afraid to talk about it. And so actually spaces that have psychological safety, conflict is more acceptable there because conflict is handled in a reasonable way. It's not something about aggression and trying to put the other person down. Well, when something happens that someone doesn't like or doesn't feel good about, they feel okay talking about it. That's the safety, is that you can say what's on your mind. And this could be especially important in cases where there's like a hierarchy of people, and the sense that, okay, even if you are lower on the hierarchy, you can say something to someone higher up on the chain. So for example, let's say you're in a surgery and there's the surgeon who is like the head, the top person, and there's all these people below them, nurses, technicians, other people who are part of the team but considered below that person. A good level of psychological safety would be that if the nurse notices that the doctor is doing something wrong, they feel comfortable saying, hey, doc, I think whatever, this is happening, or maybe we should do this, or that's going on. And the doctor is going to be okay with that, not, berate them and say, how dare you question me, or, I'm the authority here. They'll have that space. And what they find is when, hospitals, medical teams have this type of psychological safety, they make far fewer mistakes or errors. Because, things happen where, even like in the extreme, they amputate the wrong arm or leg or something like that. But lots of mistakes can happen, as in any area, but in medical fields. And the mistakes can be literally life or death, are often just very, very extreme or significant impact on people's lives. And the better this sense of psychological safety that they can bring things up, that it's not that, if you make a mistake or if you're not happy about something, you should feel bad about it or you're not allowed to say anything. There's more success there. So it's not about low standards. They actually have higher standards, even though they might not have this kind of tough love feeling of we're going to be so hard on ourselves that if you make a mistake, you have to, punish yourself or will be punished. So bringing this back to ourselves and making change, it's not to say, and I think people go to these extremes, as I was saying before, oh, no, you're perfect the way you are. And if anyone, doesn't like something about you, that's always their fault. Or, there's nothing for you to improve on because you're perfect. No, you're not. None of us are perfect. And so I think we all should be aiming to continue to grow and change, because that's important. And also because it is difficult. We do have a tendency to want to stay the same, something I think I'll get into in the last segment. And so it's not to say look at yourself as perfect as the other extreme. That no, actually, it's not that I thought I had to change completely, but now I realize no, I don't have to change at all. This is it. And everyone has to just accept me as I am. Of course, for other people, that would be not fair if you're treating them bad, but even just for yourself to not want to improve and to grow and to continue to improve and grow. There's this saying of if you're not growing, you're dying. As a living being, you want to be growing. And growing doesn't mean, of course, just in size, but it could be in strength or in health or in knowledge or in all these other ways that you can grow and make yourself better. So I'm all about wanting to improve ourselves, but I think we want to come from the mindset of compassion and self-love, not to be soft on ourselves, but actually to give ourselves the safety to go forward, to give yourself the safety to look at the mistakes. Because if you're so hard on yourself and then you make a mistake or something's not going well, you're actually likely to ignore what's going on. It's like if a child is afraid that if they tell their mom or dad they broke something that they're going to get punished, they're more likely to literally sweep what they broke under the rug. I don't want it to be seen. But if they know, okay, they might be disappointed, but it's going to be okay, it's much easier to say, Mom, Dad, I broke the vase when I was playing with my ball. And they might say, okay, you have to help glue it together, or we're going to do something to make it right. But there isn't this fear of being, severely punished. It makes it easier to be open and to not hide. And so we want to be that way with ourselves, because if we punish ourselves too harshly, we will even hide from ourselves. So we might make a mistake. Maybe we said we're going to do something every day, and the first day we don't do it, we almost pretend like it didn't happen and just forget we ever made that goal to begin with, and just, move on with life as if that never happened, even though it's somewhere in the back of our mind. So if we actually have that safety with ourself, and that safety essentially is a lack of shame and a lack of severely punishing ourselves, we make it more likely and more possible for us to make change, to make progress, to withstand the ups and downs of what happens when we make progress, to withstand the imperfections of progress. Sometimes there's this idea that starting tomorrow, I'm going to perfectly do this thing. And that's almost never the case. You can improve, but even improvement is imperfect, and improvement is not only in the right direction. It's overall in the right direction, but not every step in the right direction. And the more we can love ourselves and accept ourselves and give that sense of compassion and acceptance with ourselves, it's actually more likely that we can make positive changes in the right direction. So let's go into our last commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So the show focus has been on change, how we change, or the ideas about change, or sometimes the bad ideas we have about change, about how we're supposed to be so different from who we are, and who we are now is so bad, and who we're supposed to become is so good, when we're wrong on both accounts. But as I said, change is very possible. Change is something wonderful and something that we all can attain, but it is very, very difficult. So I hope no one leaves this, if they're listening thinking, oh, that's good, that means I'm off the hook, I don't have to change at all, or I can just, be who I am and give up, because that's definitely not the message I would want to be taken from this. It's actually that I want us to have a realistic mindset and idea about change. I think that's going to make it more likely for us to be successful in making positive changes. But change is very hard, because how we do things, how we go about things, we've found some kind of comfort zone, and comfort zone, another one of these, counterintuitive words, because it doesn't mean it feels good all the time. Sometimes people say, oh, like I haven't gone on a date for 4 years and I'm home all the time, and it's just, I'm so miserable about it. And you might say, oh, it's actually become comfortable for you. And I say, no, how can you say I'm comfortable? I'm telling you I'm miserable. I'm so sad. But the reality is they're more comfortable, in that sadness that they know what to expect of each day, rather than the anxiety of putting themselves out there and the unknown of what's going to happen if they try to date or deal with rejection, relationships, and all of those things. So our comfort zone don't mean we're so thrilled about every aspect of life, but it's something that's become easy for us. And because we know it, that feels better than going into something we don't know. And change always involves losing some bit of what you know and are used to for something that's different. And that's always a little bit scary. We could look at how each of us have found a strategy, a way of living that we learn from a very young age to survive our childhood, to withstand the circumstances of our own personal childhoods and what was going on within our homes and within our lives. We all learned a way to survive. That could be, and I don't mean like some one way. It's lots of different things that we incorporate into our lives of what works, what doesn't work. Okay, people can be, unpredictable, so don't rely on them. And we learned that, okay, just, don't expect people to do what they say they did. Or you just can't rely on people in general. So just be by yourself, because you can't trust other people, or you can't do things yourself, and people like it when you rely on them. So rely on other people, become dependent on them. And I'm making a lot of it about this kind of relying on part, but that's just one aspect of it. And so we learn this, strategy of what works in the world to survive, and that makes sense. And often, we could see it made a lot of sense to do things the way that you did in that period of your life, just to survive and get through, to survive your childhood. You had parents that were so unpredictable. It makes sense that you had to hold a lot in, because it was a lot safer than sharing things with them because they might explode, they might punish you, they might do certain things. But this is, where then we get in trouble, is that it made sense and it helped us survive then. But what usually happens is now it's not letting us live a good life going forward because we're no longer in that environment. An analogy I like for this is that if you grew up in a house where there was fire, you might have learned to always duck your head to avoid the smoke so you can breathe. So to survive in that home, you had to kind of walk around, with a hunched back or almost bending down. And that made a lot of sense. That helped you survive. You would have died otherwise if you stood upright. But then you leave that home, but for the rest of your life, you're still walking around bent over, afraid to stand up. And I like that analogy because it's almost like this notion of standing up tall or standing into your whole self or being a whole self. And so most of us are doing that. We're walking with our heads down or scrunched over, our back hunched over, because that was the environment we grew up in, but we're no longer there. You can stand up tall and breathe fine, maybe even breathe better than you could bent over, but you're too afraid because the feeling you had growing up was anytime I brought my head up, I inhaled smoke, and it was really scary and really painful. And so I need to stay bent this way. And so we walk through the rest of our lives that way. This is this cliche of psychology where it's like, okay, let's go back into your childhood and figure out why you are the way you are. And it's like, oh, come on. This is, everything's my mom and dad's fault. And no, it's not about being their fault, but for sure this life that you had and the way you were brought up is going to impact the ways you see yourself and see the world and see other people. And so we want to try to understand that. I was using this analogy of the hunched over, but what was your strategy that you had to learn in your life to survive? And in what ways is that now holding you back from living a life you would want to live, a more full life? And another analogy I like is, it's kind of like you might be like, well, I dance, but then we realize you're dancing, but you never move your left arm and your right leg. So you could dance and you move, but then there's parts of your body that never move because you're too afraid to move them because it was never safe to move them. And so you can dance, but you won't really be dancing fully or dancing in a way that's going to be most enjoyable, expressive, and full for yourself. And so because of that and all these things I'm talking about, change is scary because it's, there's lots of smaller changes. Okay, I want to work on this part of my diet, or I want to read more books, or I want to, whatever it is that you want to change. Sometimes they're more surfacey type of things. But the deeper type of change, it almost always should feel a bit scary. So even though you might want it really bad, like, oh, I don't want to feel lonely anymore, that analogy of the person who won't go on a date. And they might really feel that strongly. But what we realize is that their fear of that unknown is somehow still overpowering that sadness that they're experiencing of being stuck the way that they are. So they have to accept that it's going to be scary. And so the real deep, meaningful changes that we make, it could feel like a breakthrough. I'm not saying breakthroughs don't happen, that there is moments of insight, but and there's also a big difference between insight and change. You need to have the insight to change, but insight doesn't automatically equal change. So if you realize oh, it looks like I'm not applying for that promotion because I always thought my sister should do better than me, and I don't like to, put myself in a position where I might take something from someone else or whatever. You might realize that, but that doesn't mean applying for the promotion will be easy for you the next day. The change will still be hard even if you have that insight and have that awareness. And so when we make major changes, deep changes, yes, we obviously want to make the change at some level because we want to make that kind of progress that we're becoming aware of. But it should also be a bit scary. It should almost always will come with some kind of anxiety or fear attached to it. Change almost always comes with some sense of loss. That's always going to be there, but with it some anxiety for the loss. You're getting rid of a car you have liked for a while, but for a car you've been wanting to have for a long time, but there's still some anxiety about the change and what will missing this car, but also transitioning to that new car. So it's even something you want, but that loss will always come with change. When we try to make bigger changes within ourselves and about ourselves, we have to be ready that it's not just this good thing that we're going towards. It's going to feel a bit scary. So that's something to be ready for, that deep, meaningful changes will often make us very excited, but also can make us very scared or anxious too. That this is scary to go into this kind of new thing. The other thing that relates to what I've been talking about a lot is that it's going to be slow. And as I was just saying, we might think, well, I've made the breakthrough, now it's over. I've realized why I do what I do. I've learned this is why I had this strategy growing up, but I see that this is not the world I live in anymore, and I don't have to live that way. But when it comes time to actually make the change, it's going to be a lot harder than that. It's not just going to be, okay, now I know I'll never make that mistake again. I see this a lot with phobias, where people might say, okay, well, if I remember, the reason why I'm scared of dogs is because I realized my parents told me there's a story when I was 4 years old, and this dog, the owner dropped the leash, and this dog chased me and finally got to my leg, and it didn't really bite me hard, but it was terrifying. I was so scared, and they had to calm me down, and for a long time I was crying, and after that I was always scared of dogs. And so they think, well, now if I know that memory of where the phobia started from, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. But it helps, but it almost always will still require work of exposing yourself to dogs in present day and to unlearn or to learn something new that, okay, dogs are not so scary. Armed with this memory that you now are aware of, it might help you to face it with more courage and conviction. Okay, that's why it is it's not something bigger than that, or it's, I was 4 years old, it's not the same thing. But when you then go to encounter a dog, you're still going to be very scared those first times. It doesn't mean now you won't be scared. So we have to be ready for that. Change is slow. And just because you know why you might be the way you are, you understand it better, that insight and awareness won't automatically lead to change. So, I was talking about that, walking with the hunched back, in general, when you try to change your posture, most people experience it. You have to keep making yourself conscious of it because you go back to that comfort zone or what you're used to, even if it's less healthy. And so we do that in our lives too. You realize, okay, I don't want to avoid conflict. I'm going to speak my mind more. And you do it a few times and you're feeling great. And there's almost a sense of, I've conquered it. I know why I would avoid conflict. I looked at my family experience and now I've shown myself I could do it. I don't have to avoid it anymore. So it's done. But if you're not conscious of it, you likely will slip back into the same patterns in an unconscious way. Well, yeah, I'm upset, but I don't have to say something this time. I don't want to say it right now, or it's not the right timing. And you will likely find yourself making the same kind of excuses to do what you've always done. So change is hard. Change is slow. We're often going to be afraid of change. And change requires consistent effort. It's kind of like learning a new habit or routine. At the beginning, it's always very, very hard. You're like, okay, I want to do this. And you try it the first day and it takes some effort and you get it done. But then the next day you forget or you don't get it done and you have to try again and again. And this is what I was saying before, that change is hard and it takes a long time. But, all of us have had this experience of new habits forming. And once they're formed and part of your routine and, feel like a habit, it's hard to imagine not doing that thing anymore. And here I'm talking about positive things, but unfortunately we've all taken up or picked up bad habits too that we used to not do. And now we look at ourselves, look what I'm doing now, whether it's, let's say a bad habit of being on your phone or a bad habit of what you're eating or not exercising or, whatever, talking to someone a certain way. We pick up bad habits too. And the thing is, we can put deliberate effort into the direction we go into with our habits. And that's where we want to focus, that if we put our effort into building good habits, they'll become easier to do and become almost automatic over time. And if we don't pay attention or if we indulge in some bad habits, unfortunately, the same thing can happen there. You can get to the point where every morning, you feel like you have to go for a run because you're so used to going for a run, or you can get to the point where every morning you wake up and you think you have to have a cigarette because you've gotten used to smoking cigarettes every morning and built that type of addiction. It doesn't mean you can go from one to the other instantly, but you definitely will go to one or the other over time. So we want to think about the habits that we're building. And so when we think about making change, I was talking about some of these challenges here, but I also think that's why it's important to think of the slower, deeper type of change rather than the quick fix, because habits are very, very powerful. Habits are really, I want to say dictate might sound strong, but almost they really dictate a lot of what happens in your life. We can't control them completely because once they're formed, they're there. But of course, we can change them. But we want to really put a lot of conscious effort on what are the habits that we are building. So I didn't mention this. I kind of alluded to it that, yes, New Year's is this time that everyone thinks about change, but we can do change at any time. It doesn't have to be on New Year's Day. I always think as Iranians, we get a second chance. We have the New Year's, January 1st, but then Persian New Year is like 2.5 months later. So we get to try our goals again. But we can make change anytime, but really to be conscious of the changes that we make and realize the slow changes that we make that over time will make a big impact. And just remember that in general, change is slow, but can be very meaningful. And when you make the slow, deep changes, they usually last longer too. Quick fixes usually don't lead to fixes at all. And when they do, they lead to quick failures as well. You go back to how you were before because it really wasn't some deep, meaningful change that was made. All right, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. A big thank you to Farid here in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee, Zan Zendagi Azadi.